Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of our Leadership Engagement live webinar series, where we can connect and imagine and engage. I get the privilege of being your host today. I am Jesse Ennis. I'm the local pastor at Assurance UMC and the Director of Communications for the Leadership Development team of our conference. And today we seek to engage. To help us with this, we are discussing ministry with the nuns and duns, and our guests today do just that. Our guests are Reverend Dr. Andrea Smith, pastor of West UMC in Mooresville, and Andrea's DMin work focused on reaching the nuns and duns. And with her is Reverend Lexi Hernandez, who is also a pastor of West UMC, and she pastors Growth Co. for people in their 20s and 30s. Hi, friends.
Hi.
Good to see y'all today. Good to see y'all today. Now, Andrea, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell us why you decided to make this the focus of your DMin?
We had the opportunity of launching West out of Williamson's Chapel the conversation began with the conference about 14 years ago with Bishop Goodpaster's initiative 30 and 3, launching 30 new faith communities in 3 years, I believe was the goal of the conference back then. And so they were looking at vital churches to launch new things for new people. And so they asked Williamson's Chapel to launch a campus that would attract people that were never going to walk through the doors of Williamson's Chapel, which is located in Mooresville. And so we launched a campus of West, and we sit in the middle of Rocky Mount United Methodist and Williamson's Chapel United Methodist and the Cove and St. Therese and lots of other really vital, dynamic churches. And so we knew that if we were going to be able to be a viable entity as a campus of Williamson's Chapel, we were going to have to do things differently to try to reach people that were never going to be a part of the church. So about that time, Adam Hamilton had written the book, When Christians Get It Wrong. And so we read that as a launch team, and we're like, oh, okay. So we need to address the reasons that people want to be or are done with the church. And so when we launched the campus, that was our whole premise, is that we are going to exist to reach the people that would never want to be a part of an institutional church. Meaning that we would do things differently. The way that we structured our leadership would be different. We would try really hard to be different as far as the structure, but not different in our theology. And so we launched a campus of West, and then I was not ordained an elder in the church. I was ordained a deacon. And in order to be the campus pastor, and I did feel called to elders' orders, but I was in the middle of all that process and all that kind of stuff. And instead of finishing an additional master's degree, they're like, go get a doctorate. And I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. And so I had to do a dissertation, and I'm like, oh, well, why not do it on what we're doing right now, which is trying to reach people that are not being reached. And my doctorate was in leadership. So the two went hand in hand.
Awesome. So you mentioned a few things. Thank you so much for giving us that background. I was thinking about, you mentioned the book and how there were listed reasons why certain folks will never darken the doors of our churches. Can you give us some of those reasons? What are some of the reasons that you've come across the most?
The number one reason that research has shown, not just when Adam Hamilton wrote the book, but the Pew Center research continues to show, is the judgmental nature of Christians. And the word Christian in today's culture is not necessarily a good tag, to have attached to your name. And so the hypocrisy and the judgmentalism that existed within religious circles was the number one reason that folks didn't want to go be a part of the church. The second was being afraid of different people that are different from us, And meaning inclusivity was the driving reason. And the third thing was getting stuck in the bureaucracy and getting bogged down with all the bureaucratic things that sometimes exist in age-old institutions.
Mm, thank you for that. All right, Lexi, we'd love to hear your story. Can you tell us about your background and your journey to becoming a local pastor?
Yes, and I will preface this by saying I can talk a lot and for a really long time, so I'll try to keep it very short and sweet. So my first church experience, I remember it clear as day. I was about 6 or 7 years old. I did not grow up in a family that attended church regularly or at all. So anytime I would be in church would be if I was sleeping over at a friend's house on Saturday night, and part of the deal would be, well, you got to come to church with us on Sunday morning. So my very first experience, I remember walking in, and we went into the actual service. For whatever reason, there either was no children's service or we didn't go in that day, but we went with my friend Haley and her parents into the main service. And that day, the pastor was doing a sermon on hell and all of the things that will send you to hell. And I had a teen mom. So if I was 6 or 7, she was in her early 20s. And my mom has tattoos, she cusses, she does all the things that this sermon was saying will send you to hell. And it absolutely freaked me out. I was kicking, screaming, and carrying on. I had an absolute fit. And that is my first experience and memory of the church. So I continued to not be a part of any church until I was in my early 20s. And I went to Appalachian State University in North Carolina. I graduated with an advertising and English degree. And my first job out of college was for a nonprofit that fought sex trafficking in the Charlotte area. And during that job, I was invited by West to speak during one of their message series about things that keep you up at night. And I had spoken at a couple churches before and other organizations, but I could immediately tell that there was something different about West. Being at West, I saw people in jeans and t-shirts, and I think I heard someone say that they might go grab a beer after. And I was like, oh, this is a church that I feel like I could be a part of. Like, it felt very inviting, welcoming, and something special that I will never forget was most churches asked me ahead of time to be very cookie cutter and not say the harsh things that came with trafficking and the reality of trafficking. Wes did not ask me to do that. Andrea was pretty much like, say the truth because we want to know the truth. And it was just the most pleasant experience, as pleasant something like that can be, of course. But immediately after that, I just knew I wanted to be a part of West in some way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, my visit there was 2 months before COVID started. So crazy things happened. But later on, I found myself with a 10-hour internship at West because it didn't matter to me what I was doing. I was just happy to be a part of that church and whatever that looked like. And then a whirlwind of other things happened. I ended up on staff full time. And now here we are. It's been amazing. And I'm so grateful. It's the best church ever, in my opinion. And I think I will keep
You're a
that.
little biased.
Yeah, but it's true. It has shown me a love like I've never experienced before, and I will forever be grateful for it. And it's given me an opportunity to be a real life 26-year-old with other people in their 20s and 30s experiencing spirituality and trying to figure things out. And it's been amazing.
Yeah, I can tell because now you are a local pastor as well
Yes.
at
Yes.
West, and you have a ministry called Growth Co. So can you tell us about Growth Co?
Yes, Growth Co started, I guess a year and a half, 2 years ago. I went to Andrea and I just mentioned in passing, it was nothing really serious at the time. I just said, hey, could we have a small group for people in their 20s, maybe even their 30s? And she was like, yeah, of course. She is all about everything new. And so it was great for her, for us to want to do something like that. We started it, it escalated. The conference really loved the ideas that we had. We all came at West, we came up with this idea for a faith infusion box. And so our children's ministry amped when COVID hit. we were doing like a YouTube video, and we would make the YouTube video in office. The people on staff would make it, and we would have children volunteers make it with us. And we would send free boxes to the children in the children's ministry to their homes so that they could perform crafts, science experiments, they could learn character development stories, all through this episode that we were doing on YouTube. And so when the 20s and 30s group started, I thought, oh, how cool would it be for an adult to get a little subscription box just as a feel-good thing to get at home? That has also escalated, and now it's a form of worship for us at Growth Co. But Growth Co is a national organization so far. We have leadership members who live in 3 different states. We're really half and half on if you live locally and if you live somewhere else in the United States. We meet online via Zoom and this new software platform called Alter Live that we're trying out with the conference. And in person, we meet at places like local bars, restaurants. We've been to Top Golf. We've been to the Whitewater Center in Charlotte. And it's really a community group that we are trying to expand the love of Christ through for people in their 20s and 30s.
That's awesome. That sounds like fantastic work. I've seen some of your pictures, I think, on your website, and my wife and I are considering, because Mooresville is not too far away from us, so we're going to come by and visit.
Yay, that would be awesome. And you're in Huntersville, right?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're around there sometimes. We can work something out if you don't want to
Yeah.
come to Mooresville.
We'll work something out. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to that. So, Andrea, can you you mentioned earlier about the folks who would never darken our doors, and we understand that folks who are nuns and duns. So can you define the nuns and the duns for us? We know that they are the folks who wouldn't darken our doors, but there's a bit of difference between the two.
Right. So first, when I was launching the campus of West, I was going through the district committee of ordained ministry and to try to transition from deacon to elder. And I'll never forget, in one of the interviews, someone said, are there really people that have never heard of Jesus? I just don't believe that. Everyone's at least heard of him. And I mean, I was anxious about the interview anyway, so I'm like, well, I believe that there are. I mean, we were just launching as a campus. We were just doing preview events, so I didn't have experience yet with people that did not meet Jesus. Then lots of just change happened really quickly. The senior pastor that we were launching West underneath his leadership moved annual conferences and went away. And there was like an interim period that we didn't have a lead pastor at Williamson's Chapel. So West just sort of kept doing its own thing. And ultimately we grew. And then the new pastor at Williamson's Chapel said, I just think it's healthier for both organizations because there was no continuity between the mama church and the baby church to stay together as one. So West ended up chartering. And it was the Sunday before, and I promise I'm getting to the answer. It's just a story. It was the Sunday before we chartered with the bishop, and folks had to decide if they were going to stay at the mama church, come to West. And it was the Sunday after the mass shooting had occurred in Youngstown. And so we had to restructure all of our messages because we wanted to address the school shooting. And so it moved a Sunday that we were going to talk about unlikely Facebook friends. That was the name of the message series, and how, like, if Jesus had had a Facebook page, he would have had some unlikely friends on there, and the shepherds were one. And so this Sunday ended up being the Sunday right before Christmas, our first one. And the people some folks that were trying to decide whether or not they were going to join West, they called themselves recovering Catholics. And so they were sitting there, and we sang Friends in Low Places by Garth Brooks. I've got friends in low places where beer drowns and whiskey chases the blues away. And we launched in September, so we had been doing some push the envelope kind of things. But after that song played, you could have heard a pin drop. I was like, okay, I think we might have just pushed them a little too far, because it was the Sunday before Christmas. And, people wanted to hear Hark the Herald Angels Sing and Away in a Manger and all that kind of stuff. And that afternoon, I got an email from the family that said that prior to that worship experience and hearing that song, they had thought, this is too out there for us. We just can't do this. And there was a young man who was about 21 sitting in front of them with an older gentleman and then some other folks that went to West that they knew. And when we started singing the Garth Brooks song, he like leaned up and leaned in and was fully present during that song. Whereas all the previous part of the worship service, the Christmas carols and all that stuff, he was sort of like, And when we finished the song and we went into the message talking about the shepherds and that God's love revealed God's self to them, first, he leaned over to his dad and he said, how could you never tell me about this person named Jesus? I got to know that guy later in great detail, in great depth, had the privilege of baptizing him. His mother had died of brain cancer when he was in 8th grade, and he battled addiction issues with heroin in high school, and his father battled mental illness, and they were recluses. And this lady and family at West, her daughter went to high school with him, and she invited him to West. And so when he came and heard Friends in Low Places, he's like, he paid attention, and then listened to the rest of the message, and ultimately fell in love with Jesus. And the family said, we didn't quite agree with the methods that you were using, to reach people, because we thought folks all at least had heard of Jesus, but now we see that they haven't. And that was 13 years ago. So the nuns are people that have never had a relationship with Jesus, and many of them don't know about Jesus at all. Like, they really have no clue why we celebrate Christmas. I mean, those things are very, very real. My daughter-in-law actually now is not a person of practicing faith. She had never heard of Jesus until she met my son. And so they do exist. It's a real thing. So those are the nuns, and done people are just with whatever. And I get passionate about the duns, because sometimes I feel like they're not fair. I do think we can be hypocritical, and I do think we can be judgmental. We are human, and we're all going to mess up. We're all going to screw up at some point in our journey, and churches are led by human beings. So to expect a church to be perfect is not fair. We encourage honest conversation when we disappoint people. But the duns are people that have been hurt by the church. And as you heard Lexi share, I mean, what a pretty significant memory for a young girl to go to church and leave thinking that her mom was going to spend forever in eternal torment. And I have stories like that, being hurt by the faith tradition that I grew up with, which was not United Methodist. And people they don't want any more ick in their lives right now. And we all are pretty quick to be hurt and wounded, especially in today's time in our world. We're very polarized, and it seems like we take a lot of our stuff out on the institutional church. And so it's one of the first things that people will walk away from if they're hurt or wounded. And so those are the duns.
It sounds like the duns especially have a very high standard for what church
They do.
should be. And like you said, we're human. And thank God for Jesus, because we do not always, or maybe even ever, reach that standard. So, like, what are some of the things that people are saying? And Lexi, you can jump in on this as well. But like, what are some of the things that nuns and duns are saying about the church?
I'd love Lexi to answer first, because she's more on the front lines with that than I am.
So the number one thing that I feel like I'm coming in contact with, and sometimes this is young adults and sometimes it's actual adults, like my father, for instance. He did not grow up in the church either. He had a pretty rough childhood, and he is very open about feeling like he's not ever been accepted by the church. But a lot of people, I think the church just wants money, and they're not willing to hear the sacrificial side of giving financially. So a lot of times I hear young adults just say, well, I don't even have any extra money to give, so I don't want you to ask me for money. And it's just, they don't understand there's a lot of other ways that you can give, which is what's so special about Growth Co. And Andrea is the one who taught me this. At Growth Co, we are not expecting people to tithe per se, because we have a lot more individuals who are exploring their spirituality rather than having a solid Christian foundation. So tithing is like a foreign concept to a lot of people, and we are okay with our members giving their time, their resources, their perspectives, and we are trying to come up with unconventional ways to supplement financially as a church campus. So that's been really special for us as well. The number one complaint has been money, or it's been that they're not really looking for someone to tell them how to live per se. Like, they don't want to go sit in a room and be preached at. They would like to explore conversations and just know that they can be the same person during like a Tuesday when they're at work, and the same person Friday night when they're at the bar and they're having drinks with their friends and loved ones. So I would say that those are the two concerning things with Duns that I've heard the most.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Doing ministry. So I primarily serve out of the second campus of Assurance, which is in West Charlotte, and typically run into that a lot. Folks are like, well, the church is really just about money. Or I've even had friends who say, well, I used to go to church, but I don't anymore because, I'm a good person, and I think I can be moral. I can be morally good without being told what to do by the church. So how are you guys addressing, Lexi, you mentioned a little bit about not really putting that expectation on people to give, but how are you addressing those other critiques of like, being good and not necessarily needing to be told what to do? What are some of the practices that you guys have engaged in?
The self-help section in Amazon or brick and mortar bookstores, which don't almost exist anymore. But self-help is a real thing, right? If you go Google podcast, the most popular, like Oprah has the Soul Network, and there are so many psychologists and psychiatrists and behavioral studies on how to help everyone live their best life ever. And the folks that are not engaged, as you mentioned, in the organized church, they'll tell you that they're spiritual, but that they don't need religion. And so we are trying very hard to figure out, well, what do they think they need, and meet them where they are with their needs, and then gradually tie in, or not gradually, that's a bad word, softly initially tie in the Jesus understanding. And then we believe that once you hear about Jesus, you fall in love with Jesus. I mean, what's not to love? Even if you're not a practicing Christian, I mean, he never was mean. So, it's easy to respect him, even if you don't want to believe in him. And so we are finding that if we can help people encounter the person of Jesus of Nazareth, then as they grow with that knowledge and that wisdom of Jesus, the person, they fall in love with the Christ, and it is life changing. And so we are trying to figure out what it is that they do need. So relationships, There's a lot of conversation at West about how to be in healthy relationships, boundaries that we need in our lives, how to have healthy boundaries with one another, how to deal with conflict. And I'm not preaching self-help. However, all of those things, you can find solid scriptural examples of how those things fit in with that. And like we did a whole message series on Elijah, but the people of West would never know that we did a whole message series on Elijah. They'll know they learned a lot about him, but we talked about courage and willingness to, hang in there even when you feel like giving up. And, those kinds of things. And those are things that people deal with every single day. So we're trying to figure out, like, what are they wrestling with and how can the church address that with being true to the gospel and being people of integrity, but also meeting them where they are in their journeys. Did I answer the question?
I believe you did.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I especially as a local pastor who preaches every Sunday, wrestling with the wrestling. I personally I preach from the lectionary and wrestling with engaging the community with the scripture and helping them to feel like the scripture is relevant. When you say you preach Elijah, but then people don't actually know that they were learning through scripture in that way. I'm really encouraged by that. I probably need to lean more in that direction for sure.
I got a lot of flack when I first started preaching because, first of all, I wasn't ordained to preach. So there was that. I didn't know what I was doing at all, other than I'd been in ministry probably 15 years in the United Methodist in our conference and had served as an associate under some of the great preachers in our conference. And so I'd learned a lot from their preaching styles. But I didn't know what I was doing. And so then I ended up taking preaching because it was the only class I had to have to get ordained and as an elder. And my preaching professor was from Candler, and she said, it's dangerous to not use the lectionary. And I see that you don't. And she said, that's a dangerous line to walk because you end up preaching the things that you're passionate about. And one of the things that I try to do is when I hear constructive criticism, figure out what I can learn from it and be better. So I keep her words in the back of my mind. And so I follow in my personal devotion and study the lectionary. I pay attention to, which parts of the Bible am I shying away from, because we do topical message series. So I just try to be cognizant of that. But I don't have the bandwidth mentally to take the lectionary and then figure out how can I make this cool and relevant and fun and informative and engaging. My brain just is not that smart. So I talk to the people a lot and ask them, what do you need? What do you need to hear? We poll the congregation twice a year to see what would be relevant to you in your life right now. And so the Elijah series was actually one called Burnout, and talking about being burned out in life. We used Elijah the whole time. So I don't know how to use the lectionary and do what we do.
Well, what it sounds like you do know how to do is listen. And we've spoken a lot about holy listening on the leadership development team. And it sounds like that is kind of like the driving force of your messages. And I believe that if that's the driving force of your messages, then that means that people are a lot more engaged. What are some other ways that you are doing holy listening? Are there other ways besides the poll that you mentioned?
Lexi does it really well with Growth Coast. So Lexi, tell them about your boxes and your Zooms and that kind of stuff.
Okay. I also think we could talk about soul creations, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So with Growth Co., like I said, we have a pretty diverse group our leadership team, 3 of them live out of state and 3 of us live here locally. One of our leadership members, his name is Julian, and he says every time we get together and in our little group chat that we have, that he will probably never be a professing Christian. He always says like, oh, I respect what you're doing, but I don't think I'm ever going to believe in Jesus. And we're like, okay, fine, because he doesn't even see that he's one of the most Jesus-like people in Growth Co. And so I'm just like, okay, Julian, if that's what you want to think, we'll see about that. But our subscription box he's one of our, Julian is one of the main people who his input is one of the biggest for our subscription boxes. He's always thinking about, hey, we should do this. This could go in that box. This is a good reflection question. What we've turned our subscription box into is what we call the 6-pack. Growth Co has a brewery theme to it just to keep things consistent and concise. And because we do typically enjoy a beverage or two when we get together in person. So our subscription box is called the 6-pack, and it has 6 tangible items in it. And then it has what I call the meat of the box, which is like our spiritual component and what would be considered the worship experience. And it has a little blurb about whatever our theme for that box is. And then each member of the leadership team submits either a motivational quote or Bible verse. They can choose between the two, and then a reflection question, because Growth Co's biggest thing is we want you to be able to develop spiritually, communally, and individually on your own time or with us. It's completely your choice. And Andrea can share, or she can back me up when I say that hurt my feelings kind of at first. That was an adjustment for me in ministry. I was like, no, if they don't want to come to anything, then I don't know if they should get a box. Like, I was like, we're spending money on them. We're doing this, this, and that. And she was like, oh, girl, they can get a box. They can develop without being in person. So that's actually been one of the biggest things about Growth Co. is there are a lot of members that I've never talked to face to face. I text with everybody. The leadership team texts with everybody. But there are some that I may never see face to face, and they are perfectly fine with that. They are getting their worship experience with us through that box from the comfort of their own home. And it's been amazing to do so. So that's been special. And I really did have a rough patch where I had to just get told that like it can happen in different ways. So we have our subscription box, we have our online gatherings, which are mainly for the people who don't live locally to us, but we do have some local members who want to come on those as well, just because it's always a different experience. It's different people. They're always just guided conversations. There are some times though where I don't have an agenda. I'm like, here's our topic. Let's talk about it. Because when we're doing our Zooms and when we're having our in-person conversations, I am technically the pastor and the leader, but it's amazing to see what the Growth Co members will come up with. Sometimes they'll have better questions than I could have come up with, and we just have organic conversation around the topic. And it's really vulnerable. It's really just a great experience. I can say with complete confidence that I learn as much from Growth Co members as I hope they can from me. So, yeah. Now my throat's dry. Do you want to talk about some creations?
Yeah.
And you said the other, like, what do we do at West? It's about relationships. And so one of the things that we try to do is make sure everyone has, I don't want to say a touch because that's not politically correct at all, but an interaction or a person that they connect with. So, and it works out like it's like fingers, and that every staff person has 6 to 10 people that they're responsible for leading. And then those 6 to 10 people are some of our key leaders in the church. And so those 6 to 10 have 6 to 10 that they develop relationships with and ask the questions. And we do it different in worship. We're always trying to figure out how to pivot. And it was the pandemic certainly was tragic for our world, but it pushed us because we were on a quick trajectory to probably a somewhat slow death, but we would have died as a new church start. I really believe, had the pandemic not happened and made us change quickly, because we just couldn't pivot fast enough as we were growing and changing. And our children's ministry was one of our strongest things, and then it tanked. And then we didn't reinvent it enough. That bell curve, when it's at the tops, when you're supposed to reinvent, so it keeps going up instead of, coming back down. And we didn't do it well. And so I don't want to sit here and say like, oh yeah, we're all that, because we weren't and aren't. And when the pandemic happened, we had to shift everything. And we had to go online like everybody else. We were already online, but we had to go that way all of the way. And I really wrestle right now with the fact that like West does not look like a successful church on paper. Or if you were to come visit with us on Sunday morning at 10 a.m., you'd be like, oh my gosh. And they're still open. We were 200, 250 at one point, right before the pandemic. And then it had dropped down to like 150 online and 100 in the high school, which were like, we need you to come back, to in person. Why aren't you here in person? And then the pandemic happened. We could not reopen as early as other churches because we were bound by the high school. We don't own any property. And so we did not reopen until just over a year ago. And when we reopened, I think maybe crickets were happening in the auditorium. There have been Sundays we have 30 people sitting there. It's very disheartening. However, we have a 9 a.m. online live streamed service, and it is stronger than ever. And Lexi mans our chat room for that. And we're doing a lot of the stuff that we learned from Jason Moore in the Both And about how to have a more dynamic chat instead of just, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And so over the last year, we've gotten back up to like 50 to 60 in the high school sometimes, but our healthiest engagement in worship is our live streamed service, which is completely different than the 10 a.m. in-person service. And so yesterday, because we had a no huddles event, and that's where we don't have church as we normally would, we break out of the holy huddle that the pastor Harvey Carey in Michigan teaches about. We offer things for the community during the worship hour to prove to the community that we don't have to be all about us all the time. And so we had our Halloween extravaganza yesterday, and it started at 11. And worship for in-person was getting ready for the event. And we had more people there yesterday than I've seen in 3 years as far as church people. And but I still had to do something online. And so we did a Zoom, or actually we did live online like this, but I had them listen to the scripture passage audibly read through Bible Gateway. And then they were supposed to respond to different phrases and throw them out there and us discuss them, just trying to see, how do they want spiritual formation? What do they want that to look like as we move ahead? Because small groups are not working the way they used to. We used to have phenomenal small group participation, and almost everyone in the church had a group. And now they don't want to go out at night when they're at home. They want to be at home, and I don't blame them. I don't think I'd leave either anymore. Like people are tired. And so we're trying to figure out, how can we help you grow in your faith in more than just on demand content, in a dynamic relationship. And so we're asking folks those questions. We're having listening sessions and having people respond. So those are the things that we're trying to utilize so we can figure out what to do and how to pivot next.
Thank you for sharing all of that. I feel like you've introduced a lot of different and new options that we can try. I know a lot of us are are in the same boat as you are, comparing our pre-COVID and our post-COVID numbers and not feeling super excited about those. And so grateful to hear about new opportunities. You mentioned the both and. Our church has done some of that as well. And so, but there are folks who don't think we should be doing anything new, that think that the church is the church, and we need to focus on the things of God. We need to put God first. And personally, I've heard a lot of talk of things like revival, that we just need another revival, and the church is maybe is doing too many secular things when we should be sacred. And so just kind of throwing that out there, how would you respond to those types of comments?
See, that's as I was preparing for this and praying about this time together. That's one of the things that resonated with me. I don't have an answer, because, well, that's not true. I do have sort of an answer. I have a difficult answer. I had what I think could be the shortest appointment in our conference in like the last 20 years. There was a small church that is about 2 miles from Lake Norman High School, and their pastor was a local pastor, a part-time local pastor that was supposed to be coming to serve their church, and they backed out like the week before conference. And so my DS and I were talking, and he's like, do you want to be their pastor? And we had done great ministries together, like community events, and it was a diverse interaction, to different ethnicities as far as the churches went. And we'd been doing ministry together for like 8 years. So I thought, okay, this is going to work. They trusted me, I thought, and stuff like that. So I became their pastor. And some of the things that you just said were some of the biggest criticisms that I heard. They wanted to have a movie night. And I mean, that looks like preschool work for West. I mean, that's so not secular to West. I mean, Lexi's got a whole thing based on the idea of alcohol. I mean, so like having a movie night is not controversial, is what I'm trying to say. And for that congregation, it was. And so we engaged in conversations around, why do you exist? Who are you trying to reach? And they said they wanted to reach people that are none and done. And I'm like, well, then you have to learn to think that way. And you can't think like churched people. If you keep thinking like churched people, you're going to reach churched people. And you're not doing that. I mean, they had like 10 people to 20 people in their church. And I'm like, this is not sustainable. And they knew that. And but I didn't last there long. Like, they were driving, I drove them crazy, and my soul was becoming depleted very quickly. And so I think it takes just so much thick skin to be willing to hear someone say those things and then say, okay, how can we, why are we here? And how can we reach people? How can we think like they do? And the other answer is, Mike Slaughter, when he went to Ginghamsburg years and years and years ago, the church imploded because they were dying, and he was willing to say, we've got to do things different. And the people that had those sacred cows, those things that could not be touched, he was willing to let them walk away. And as hard as that is, that does have to happen. And West has lived through that now twice. Once when we had to charter, people didn't want to be not a part of the big church, the beautiful brick and mortar church. So we lost about a third of our worshiping congregation. And so we had to start over again. And then when we claimed our core values, our first core value is that we follow the Jesus model. If Jesus did it, we try to do it. If Jesus didn't do it, we look at it and figure out if it's relevant to people that are trying to trying to find their way in life. And then the second core value is that all means all. And so we've been an all means all church from the beginning, having leaders that were of different sexual orientation, and that caught some people, I think, when they finally figured it out. Like, we never made it a big deal. It was just all people are welcome. And if you have leadership gifts, you use them. And I didn't poll them for what their bedroom practices were. And so folks got really upset when we claimed that core value, and we lost a third of our worshiping population again. And that time, all the people that left were the church people. And they were, of course, our biggest givers. And I called James Howe. I had gone to the Holy Land with him, and I called him. I'm like, I've got to meet with you. I said, we've just lost 10 families in the past 2 weeks, and they represent $40,000 a year of our giving. And I don't know what to do. And he said, God has gifted West and called West to be West. And there are lots of other churches out there that these folks will find a home. And God will sustain you, even though it's difficult. And so I would just say, have the courage to be bold. The people that led the Israelites out of captivity, they were bold. They were exhausted a lot of the times and wanted to give up, and people had to hold it up their arms and that kind of stuff. I mean, Elijah wanted to off himself because everybody, like, he felt deserted. But yet God always provided. And I have seen that happen over and over and over again at West. And I know that it will happen when we face criticism and speculation and all that stuff in your churches too. God will sustain you in and through all things.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We've got a few questions in the chat, so I'd like to turn it over to questions and encourage more questions. If you have any, please leave them in the chat, and for our final minutes, we will go through those. So our first question comes from Jonathan Gaylord. He asks, how do you talk about new birth, transcendence, transformation of the Holy Spirit? And let's start with that question first.
Jonathan, do you want to hear from Lexi or me? Which group?
Either. Both.
For me, at the old people campus, that's what I call it, because I'm old, we talk about being at one. We talk about the meaning of the word atonement. We talk about the meaning and the translation of the word salvation. And salvation means transformation, and the pathway, the trajectory that we're supposed to be if we follow the commands of Jesus, which is to love God, love ourselves, and love one another. And the definition of sin, and that sin means missing the mark, and that lots of times, we've misinterpreted the definition of sin. And so we talk a lot about missing the mark, and what is the mark, and the mark is love. And when are we not living as people of love? And we talk about the Holy Spirit, this presence, this energy lives and exists in each of us. And we talk about levels of consciousness and states of consciousness. We talk about our souls. Those are the kinds of things that's the kind of vernacular that we use at West.
Yes.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Lexi. Sorry.
Same for Growth Co. We really take it not a step below, because I think it's equally as important. But I learned that obviously from Andrea and from the entity of West and the movement of West. And so for Growth Co., because we have a lot of nuns and duns in Growth Co., we talk about how Jesus's whole thing while he was on earth was to be the best human that you can be. Obviously, he had different sets of not being human, but for us, it's always trying to better yourself as a human being, loving others, loving yourselves, knowing that the same source of love that has done everything else good in the world lives within us, and just trying to develop that further. So that's where our developing personally, spiritually, and communally comes from. And our the way we tie that into our brewery theme is all about pouring in and pouring out and overflowing with other people. So we try to keep it as the source of love is within you, and you can develop that in many ways.
So you would say that the way that the place of those conversations in a social and relevant conversations is in the way that you express it, especially in the vernacular. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. To Thelma, we will be sharing this recording. It will be available, and we'll make sure that every one of you has an email of it, but also we will be sharing it on the Leadership Development Team page. Also, Amy Vaughn, I think I'm pronouncing that right. You can correct me if I'm not. I'm doing.
That's right. Yeah.
She's doing a Bible study. What's Brewing? Love the title. In both local coffee shop and local pub. And she says, just been at it for a short time, but I am looking for ways to be invitational without scaring potential, perhaps nuns and duns away. Do you have any ideas? She said she's had a few folks come, including some church members and some marginally connected to our congregation, but not yet much beyond that. So do you both have any ideas?
I think, everybody always teaches it's a personal invitation that will get people to come, that's one of the primary ways we can get people to our community. So I do think if you could get, Amy, especially the folks that you've got that are marginal, to invite their friends that probably are marginal or none or done to come. And then when they get there and they experience that it's not intimidating, it's non-threatening. That's been our tagline: real, relevant, and non-threatening. And I understand that could seem like it dumbs down the gospel, but it doesn't. Again, once you fall in love with Jesus, I mean, there's some pretty clear expectations that come along with that as being people of love, but we're not trying to scare anybody into being a Christian. But word of mouth, asking them. And then I just think it's so important that when they get there, it not be threatening. So using words like Bible study, that seems, what I've heard from West people is that's intimidating. Like they don't feel, it's not that they don't want to study the Bible, it's that they don't feel equipped and ready to study the Bible. So then they don't want to get with other people because they're afraid they're going to look dumb and they're not going to sound intelligent. And so, one of the things that Lexi's done that I think is relevant for all of us is just watch our vernacular. It's conversation. It's a place where all questions are welcome, that doubts are accepted, that you don't have to come knowing all the answers. And Amy, I know you, so I know that you use those words and those languages, not languages, but you know what I mean. I would just keep doing what you're doing, but try to get people to invite their friends. And then once they get there, they'll see that they're not going to be beat over the head with dogma.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I wanted to ask, and you guys can continue to share questions in the chat. What's your vision for the church? We at the Leadership Development Team encourage everyone to have a vision and a mission for their church, because we know that without a vision, the people perish. So what is your vision for West and Lexi for Growth Co. in your community?
The vision for West is still to reach people that would never darken the doors of a church. But the doors have changed. Now, they're not Williamson's Chapel's doors where the big steeple and the beautiful building, they're the doors of the high school. And so with every ministry that we create now, we are still trying to answer that question: what's going to reach people that are not ever going to come sit in a high school and listen to secular music? What's going to be real and relevant and help them meet Jesus? And so our vision is to continue to try to figure out how to do that. And part of that is realizing that the church has to be funded in a new way. So we started a subscription box for adults. You know, we were doing it for kids, and then Lexi did it for the Growth Co. And I'm like, oh, we should do that with our message series. So we did that, and it's okay. But what we did figure out, sorry, that's the very scared German Shepherd. Oh my gosh, sorry.
You're fine.
Lexi, talk until
Okay.
Axel stops speaking.
I love Axel. I wish everyone could get to meet him. So part of being such a diverse group of young adults means that we have people who vote differently politically. That we have a bunch of different beliefs as far as politics, and then we have a bunch of ethnically diverse people. So for us, our main thing is that our hope and vision would be to create a safe space where all minds, and one of our core values is the same as West, the all means all, but where all minds and perspectives and thoughts, questions can be explored, and that our main goal is to show others how to love like Christ, how to be loved, and to know that we are all meant to be spiritual beings and that not everyone's journey is the same. So just that safe space to where we can all explore what it means to be in your 20s and in your 30s, doing real life and loving Jesus at the same time. So that would be our vision. And Andrea was starting to talk about soul creations, I think. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we have recognized that the people that understand the concept of tithing are churched people, and we have some churched people that are still a part of West, but for the most part, you know, we have reached nones and dones. And so the being beat over the head and asked for money all the time is something that they are not interested in doing, which has left us at a place that we are having a hard time, you know, meeting budget needs. And so we have created this thing called Soul Creations. It was born out of an idea that Lexi had to create their own beer. You know, she's like, what if we create brew our own beer as Growth Co. and then sell it and make money? I'm like, sounds good to me. Don't know anything about that. So figure that out. But what we did realize is that we do know some, you know, crafty kind of things. And so we have launched a nonprofit called Leveling Up Together, and we create jewelry, resin, and candle products that we are selling. And that money goes to support Growth Co. We also have started a campus in Kagumba, Uganda, with some young men that started worshiping with us online, and it supports our AMPed, our children's character development TV program, children's ministry. So we're trying to find unconventional ways to fund the church, and that's a big part of our vision.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We are right at 1 o'clock. We are right at the hour. So thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared with us today. Thank you so much for allowing us to journey with you in your mission and your vision, and all the great work that you're doing for God and reaching people that would never darken the doors of our churches. I, for one, feel very much encouraged, and especially by the fact that a lot of the things that you mentioned are struggles that we are at our church are having as well with reaching folks. And so for one, I know that I am not alone. Grateful for all of you that were able to join us today for our discussion. And just want to say again, thank you to Reverend Dr. Andrea Smith and Reverend Lexi Hernandez and Axel, all who are reaching people for the kingdom. So thank you so much for your time. We want to invite you to join us for our follow-up conversation on November 14th at the same time, 12 to 1. But until then, we want you to continue to engage with one another, engage with the communities around you, and to continue to engage with Christ and allow the Spirit of God to lead you in your ministries. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.